Hi, Sbobo. So tell me,
Hello.
Sbobo, are you a current student and what year are you in and what do you study?
So yes, I'm a junior and I study psychology and public action. I never know what to call it, public action or Kappa, but
Hmm.
I
No one
study
knows what
public,
Kappa is outside of Bennington.
true, and photography. So three
Great.
P's, I like to call it. Uh, so yeah, that is me. I'm from the kingdom of Eswatini.
I don't know where
Um,
that is.
It's Swaziland. It used to be Swaziland
Oh,
till
okay.
like
Got it.
last year. So
I didn't get the memo on the new name. It's excellent though.
apologies. We'll send it in the mail.
And
I
where are
am,
you now? Are you in this country?
yes, I'm on campus.
You
I live
are.
in
So
the,
campus is open to foreign students or
yes. They just like allowed a few students to stay,
great.
uh, because some people it's impossible to leave.
Yes, and hard to get back in later and yeah, lots of
Definitely.
complications. And they're feeding you?
They are.
Excellent.
But I live in an apartment, so like
Oh,
I can actually cook for myself, which
are
I
you in
think
North
is
Bennington?
good.
Where are you?
Yeah, it's like there's apartments in North Bennington, Parent Creek.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so
I
that's
lived in an apartment in North Bennington my last year. Um,
yeah.
I don't, it was very old house actually, but I don't remember what street it was on. And I don't know if Heron Creek existed then.
I don't. It's very new. Parent Creek is really new.
Yeah, I see.
Um,
Great.
so yeah, this is me. We're just gonna get into the questions. So,
Okay, I'm ready for you.
could you please introduce yourself?
Sure.
Um,
My name is Michael Pollan, and I was at Bennington and graduated in the class of either 76 or 77. There's some dispute about that because I graduated in December.
mm, mm,
But I entered with the people who graduated in 77.
I see. So what did you study at Bennington, and uh, how much did your undergraduate education influence what you are interested in today, or what you work and like your approach to your work?
Oh, it influenced it profoundly. I'm a writer. I make my living as a writer of books and articles. I'm a journalist. I write nonfiction. And I came to Bennington interested in writing um, and was an English major. And I did a thesis project about Dickens, Charles Dickens and Bleak House, his novel. Um, but oddly enough, I didn't take any writing workshops when I was there. I took a lot of critical courses. And I don't know why exactly. I was a little intimidated by the creative writing classes. It was stupid. I should have done it. But they were also all fiction and poetry. And my interest was in writing narrative nonfiction, which was barely a genre back then.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, I learned an enormous amount about writing from my teachers at Bennington. One of the things that distinguished an English professor at Bennington was that they didn't just grade your paper, they edited it. And I remember poring over the marks that Alan Shoes was a teacher I worked with a lot, and he was my thesis advisor. And that he would go through the paper and fix every passive voice and show you how to turn around the sentence to make it more active. And he would change words that were wrong. And he would cross out sentences that were unnecessary. And, we didn't have grades, so you had to pay attention to the comments. If there were grades, you would just look at the grade and throw it out. But we poured over these comments and these changes, and I learned so much about writing. Um, but I think I was talking to my wife about this, who I met at Bennington, and, what was special about it. And I think what was special about it, and I think still is special about it, is that the attitude the teachers have toward their students, which is they don't treat them as students exactly. They treat them as young apprentices.
It's
And
true.
so we were encouraged to think of ourselves as kind of junior literary critics or junior historians or junior sculptors. I took a lot of sculpture too. I did a lot of art classes as well. And that was very flattering in a way, but it also encouraged us to take ourselves seriously and imagine that I could be a writer or an English professor or a sculptor, whatever it was, and that I was apprenticing to do that work. And that was enormously important, you know, allowing us to take ourselves seriously. Now, to some people at Bennington, that goes to their head, and there are people who take themselves way too seriously. And I found that very intimidating sometimes.
Yeah.
But on balance, I think it's a very healthy thing, and partly explains how many, you know, how many writers and artists have come out of Bennington, and because we saw a kind of continuity between the work we were doing and the idea of this career. So I think I acquired the confidence to become a writer there, as well as many of the skills. And I feel like I owe a tremendous debt. I mean, I think that in many ways, Bennington made me a writer.
That's so interesting because, like, in so many ways, the Bennington professor is still like, they operate like that. So that's so interesting.
Well, I think that, you know, the DNA of an institution, I mean, things change over time, obviously, but there's a certain DNA in an institution, and learning by doing is, you know, this principle of John Dewey and the educational philosophy that undergirded the school way back when. You know, my mother went there also in the 50s, so I have a very kind of long arc of familiarity with it. And one of the reasons I went to Bennington is I was always fascinated. I would go up in the attic and open these boxes, and she had all her papers that she'd done for, you know, Howard Nemeroff, who was there in the 50s, and there was a famous critic whose name I forget, and I was just fascinated by these papers, and that you would get to write these papers with these writers. And so, you know, I'm not surprised that some of this DNA survives.
So your work synthesizes the influence of science, culture, and policy on our daily lives and habits. And this is a very Bennington way of approaching things, to focus on intersections rather than narrow disciplinaries. As you've seen, like, my courses is like photography, public policy, and photography. Have you always approached your inquiries this way, or was it something developed over time?
That's a good question. I mean, you're right to notice that I'm very interested in the fact that no one approach, no one lens is going to give you the truth on a subject. And that you need several different lenses, and that if you walk around as you would walk around a sculpture to see things from very different sides, that's when it really comes into focus. And so in my own work, I look at it historically, I look at it scientifically, I look at it personally, philosophically, and I do like that multiplying of perspectives, and it's really central to my work. That said, I made some mistakes at Bennington. You know, I have ended up writing a lot about plants in my life and botany, and I neglected to take a single science course at Bennington. This is, you know, this is the downside of having so much freedom in organizing your schedule, that sometimes you don't.
That's so true.
And there was a great botanist who taught there at the time, whose name everybody raved about, but at the time I was like, plants, you know. But so there were courses that were sitting there that I missed, and I regret, that would have informed my work and probably saved me a lot of trouble later. But you know, I think everything was taught in an interdisciplinary way, and I think we learned. But the idea that there is no single authoritative discourse that you can bring to a subject, I did learn that at Bennington. There was a very interesting course there on literary theory, just when literary theory was coming to America, and it was an interdisciplinary course taught by a professor of Russian, French, and Spanish. And it was new to them too. And we read Roland Barthes, and we read Jacques Derrida, and we read, you know, all these theorists. And it was very new at the time, very hard. But they raised the kind of questions of authority, and that, you know, that science wasn't necessarily a more privileged way of knowing something than philosophy or poetry. And so that, I guess that relativism of perspectives is something I picked up in that course, and that has influenced me quite a bit.
You already touched on like the freedom that Bennington gives to students in like crafting their own path. So your extraordinary career seems to do just this. Were there moments or teachers or experiences that you had at Bennington that you now consider formative on like your path at Bennington?
Yeah, I do. You know, one was, as I said, being taken seriously by my professors. I studied with John Gardner, the novelist. I didn't study novel writing. I studied literature, the epic. And he was incredibly supportive of me in many, many ways. And to have someone of that, he was a very important novelist at the time, quite famous. He's died since in a motorcycle accident. But to have someone like that take me seriously, in that case, as a writer and as a possible critic, was enormously helpful and meant a lot to me. And there again, I could see the path. You know, I would be in his home. He actually offered. He encouraged me to leave Bennington, actually. So this may not be the message you want to send, but he had this idea that I should go to Oxford, where he, I think, wanted to go, and he arranged it all. And but then to go to Oxford, you had to know Anglo-Saxon, bizarrely enough. And but he knew Anglo-Saxon. He was a medievalist, and that semester before I left, I would come to his house, and he would give me tutorials in Anglo-Saxon. And here was this famous novelist writing bestsellers, and you know, in the first rank at the time of American novelists. And here he was tutoring me in Anglo-Saxon so I could go off to Oxford. As it happened, I came back. I didn't like Oxford very much. I transferred and then transferred back because I missed Bennington. I missed a lot of things about it, and found the education there quite superficial. I mean, but it was actually an interesting contrast, because at Bennington, at Oxford, you fly through the canon. You do a week on every romantic poet. Maybe you slow down a little bit for Shakespeare, and you do 8 weeks for Shakespeare. But otherwise, it's, you know, you do 2 weeks on Dickens, and you're supposed to read it all and write something about it. It's insane. And you get this kind of glib familiarity with the canon. Whereas at Bennington, I took a course in romantic poetry, and we never got past Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience. Just drill down so deeply, and then we would do a class on the novel, and we'd spend the entire 3 hours on one paragraph at the beginning of the book. And so there was a very different. The idea was, we're going to show you how to read, and then you can go read on your own. But you're going to be a really good close reader, whereas Oxford, you were checking off the boxes that you'd read everything and could say something about it. And so it was a very interesting contrast of educational styles. But that ability to dig down deep and to spend 3 hours looking at one paragraph of one novel was an amazing experience, and changed the way I read. And I call on that even today.
Mm-hmm. That is so interesting, and I think that is one thing that still like really keeps me like intrigued by Bennington, how we really focus on like depth rather than breadth.
Yeah.
Like, we may not finish everything, but at least whatever we did it really well. So like,
exactly, there's nothing superficial about the education there, and you put it really well. I mean, it is about depth rather than breadth. And I know my friends who went on to graduate school at Bennington, from Bennington, they often were not as well read as other students coming in. They hadn't had those big survey courses, you know. They hadn't read all the great books, but they'd read some of them, and they knew them really well, and they had the tools they needed to take to whatever they were assigned in graduate school, and they ended up thriving.
That it's so interesting also that you got like a chance to go to Oxford, which would be like your equivalent of like study abroad,
It
except
sort
that
of was, yeah. I mean, I did do it in my junior year. It wasn't a junior year abroad thing though, because it was quite a serious program. And
yeah,
I mean, junior year abroad is often, you know, kind of more fun and
just
games
like
than
yeah, enjoy
education.
the culture.
Yeah, exactly. This wasn't that. Yeah, it was, you know, it was an interesting experience. I'm glad I did it, but I didn't want to do any more of it. I had had enough.
Yeah.
And England in the mid 1970s was a very depressing place to be too. You know, the country was kind of falling apart. There were labor stoppages every day. You never knew if you got on a train to Oxford, to London, whether you'd get back or not, or there'd be a strike. Plus there's no like hot water in the winter, and
Oh.
you know and you have to like get out of your bed in a 50-degree room to put a shilling in the heater to get a little heat before you can
Oh
get out of bed. So
no.
the central heating at Bennington was much better than at Oxford,
Oh,
and the
it's
food
big.
at Bennington was much better than the food at Oxford, although that isn't saying very much.
um, so, for students who are interested in tackling the most urgent problems of our time, like I am, what areas do you think will be the most relevant and essential to that work in the future?
History. I mean, I just think that in the end, history unlocks everything for us, and we don't pay nearly enough attention to it. Every time I tell my students always, whatever you're writing about, if you haven't found a work of history to read to inform what you're doing, otherwise we just keep repeating the same mistakes and saying the same thing. And one of the subjects I took a lot of courses in was history, even though Bennington had then probably still a very minuscule history department. There were three professors.
Yeah.
There was one Americanist and two European histories, and the rest of the world didn't even count. You know, it was very Western at that point. Um, but I learned from those teachers that reading history informs politics. Reading history informs journalism. You know, if you're interested in changing the world, you have to know how people have approached that project in the past, especially how they blew it. And so yeah, so I think that's really a key discourse, and it's of particular interest to a writer because of all the social sciences. It's the most literary. It
Mm-hmm.
still has a tradition of narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think reading history, studying history, offers the young writer a lot, and so that I think that's where I would put a lot of my energy.
Nice. So, if you were like given another shot at Bennington, what other like courses that probably have nothing to do with your interest or your work that you would take?
I would have, well, I have remembered the name of the botany teacher. His name was Ed Flaccus, and he had this wonderful greenhouse. I'm sure the greenhouse is still there.
It
And I
is.
definitely would have taken his class. I would have taken a lot more sciences than I did, biological sciences in particular. I think that was a mistake. I might have taken some psychology. Um, I did take a lot of art. And for me, art was, I mean, I learned a lot. I learned how to look at art. I'm not a very good artist. And I learned that. That's one of the things you learn too, is you get to try something and realize this isn't my thing. I don't have that quality.
Yeah.
Um, but I did learn to look at art, and it was a good relief from being in the library. You know, that
Mm-hmm.
working with my hands, I was welding a lot of steel, and that felt great to hold things. And so I think that it's really important to do something that is the antidote to whatever else you're doing. And if
Mm-hmm.
you think that you're obsessed with art, well, then you should read some history or study some science, and counterbalance whatever you're doing. Um, because in the world where we live in now and are moving into, these silos are just really not that relevant, and that everything is informed by everything else.
Everything
And
else.
so having a certain range, and also having the freedom to try things and fail. One of the beautiful things about not having grades, or that grades not being important, is that I teach now at Harvard, as well as Berkeley, and I see my undergraduates at Harvard being very strategic in the classes they take to make sure they're going to keep their grade point average high, with the result that they take things they're already good at,
Mm-hmm.
and they stay away from science
Mm-hmm.
because they know they're not going to get an A in science.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tragic. You should take courses you're not going to do well in, because you're still going to learn something really important. And so the way the rules are set up at Bennington, and I'm assuming they're still the same way, I don't know for sure, you're encouraged to get out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you may find your passion. You don't know. I mean, I had a passion for literature and writing coming in, but many people discover their passion there. And you're not going to do that unless you're willing to take some chances.
Yeah, definitely. There is a lot of room for like just trying new things. I remember like I did a podcasting class that I was just struggling in, but like reading comments rather than looking at like a letter grade is like more fulfilling. Like, you know, you've grown in
Yeah.
something, you gained a new skill, instead of like, oh, I got a B, my GPA will go down.
Right. No, it's very important to get out of that mindset and
Yeah.
be in an environment where you're encouraged to take chances.
Yeah. So is there anything else that I missed out that you would like to add?
No, only that Bennington is a very special place, and I am still close. In addition to my wife, who I met there, I'm still close to a great many people. My best friend in the world, who's now an English professor at UVA, I met at Bennington. I was a freshman; he was a senior. And there's so many Bennington people I'm still in touch with and see regularly. There's a community there, and it's a time in life where you do form those kind of friendships. Very few of those windows open. I had another one at a magazine I worked at when I graduated, but I would say that experience in Bennington, much more than high school, much more than most of the jobs I've had, are where I found my people. And so much of life at this point, when you're in your 20s, is finding your people, the people that you want to be with, the people who are part of a conversation that matters to you, and the chances are really good you'll find them at Bennington.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sbobo. It was very nice talking to you.